Hi, my name's John, and I'm a human doing. What am I doing today? I'm making a chessboard. Initially, I wanted this chessboard to be a really straightforward, simple project. Just the board itself with some mitered ends, and that was all we were going to do. But I changed my mind when I decided I wanted to do storage for the pieces. So really the story for this one is the storage. And I've never done wooden latches before, especially ones that are spring-loaded. So the latches for me are really the learning part for me. It's the first time I've done that. So hopefully you enjoy. Like, subscribe. If you have any questions, please post them below. I'll do my best to answer them. And thanks for watching.
So like a lot of other woodworking projects, the first step is going to be rough lumber breakout. So I'm using solid maple and solid walnut. The walnut is what you see me here cutting. And I am cutting my boards to about 24 inches. It's very rough. You just want to make sure you're cutting them longer than your finished project. In my case, the finished project here is 18 inches square, so 24 is tons. After you do your length, I take my material to the joiner, and I just want to get one flat face and one perpendicular edge. So one, and for me it's about 2 passes. So I'm taking roughly a 32nd of an inch off each pass. And you can see me doing the edge here. As long as you have one flat face and a perpendicular edge, something perfectly 90 degrees, you've got a good base to start on for the rest of your project. So I'm ripping material to width, and I'm cutting my material at about 2 3/8 wide. The finished project is actually 2 1/4, or the squares are 2 1/4 inch each. So 2 3/8 is really all I need for a rough cut. So once those pieces have been cut to width, again it's a rough width of 2 3/8, I'm going to run them through the thickness planer and get myself 2 nice perfectly parallel faces. So in this case here you can see me doing that. And I also decided to do the edges, or at least one edge, because I already have one clean edge. And this is just to make sure I have a really nice face for glue up, and I'm doing the finish here of 2 1/4 inches. So with all the material done 4 sides, I decided I wanted to resaw them just to double my yield. So I'm cutting all these boards in half, and then I will be taking them over to the thickness planer again to get my final finish thickness, or just a hair over my final finish thickness. With resawing finished, I can then run that one final face through the thickness planer to get me down to that 5/16 of an inch, which is my finish. Again, it's 5/16 plus a hair. And now that once that's finished, I can start with the glue up.
Before I start this glue up, I want to make a note. Anytime I'm doing any sort of glue up like that, you'll notice I'm putting pencil marks. I hope you can see the pencil marks on the wood. And what I'm doing is I'm noting the direction of the grain. So in this case, this came out from the log, and the log was this way, so it's curved in that direction. This one here, you can see I've got a curve that way. That's because that's the direction of the grain, the circular portion. And what you want to do is orient your boards so you've got one, say, happy face, and the next one is a sad face, and then a happy face, sad face, happy face. And what that will do is it will prevent your final product over time from cupping. It'll help keep your board nice and flat.
So this is a pretty straightforward glue up. You just want to make sure you're alternating your species. So in my case, it's walnut and maple, but whatever your species are for your board, just alternate them and make sure you keep your grain orientation, as I had mentioned previously, in mind to keep that board from cupping or bowing over time. I mean, Mother Nature will do what it wants to, but always a good idea to keep it in mind. So I'm using my table saw sled, to cut one edge square, and then I'm just running the remaining on the fence, and then it's back to another glue up. And you'll see me flipping one board, or every alternating board, just to make sure that I'm getting that checkerboard or chessboard pattern. And that's kind of the trick to it all. But the glue up itself is very similar to the previous. The only difference is I want to make sure that the ends, because now this is cut basically to finish size, so I want to make sure that those ends are nice and flush with each other. Now just let that glue dry, and then it's ready for the drum sander. The drum sander is what I'm using here. My thickness planer isn't wide enough. This is an 18-inch wide board. Again, those squares are 2 1/4 inches each, so my DeWalt isn't quite wide enough. It's a 13-inch maximum, I believe. So another glue up, no shortage of them here with a checkerboard. But one tip I would give you if you're doing anything like this where you don't want your part to slide, just use a little bit of table salt. It will help keep your piece from sliding. It acts like almost like sandpaper, but because it dissolves, it won't affect your glue up at all. It won't hurt the strength. Just don't go nuts with the stuff. And you can see here I'm going to be clamping it down. Now there's 2 boards. Initially there was only supposed to be 1, which is one of the errors I made in this, but I wanted to stretch it out and make 2 boards. I really should be just doing 1 board. You should be putting 1 checkerboard or 1 finished panel on top of the ply and 1 on the bottom to make sure the stresses are equal on top and bottom. But it's a bit of a no-no, but I'll say do as I say, not as I do. So while the glue is drying, I'm using that time to make the border, or the frame, for the chessboard. And so you can see me here cutting some walnut that's already done 4 sides. It's 7/8 thick, and I'm cutting it at 1 3/8 wide. The finish will be roughly 1.25 inches, but again, I'm cutting it a little bit wider. Now I want to cut a small relief out of that walnut that I just cut to width. So you can see here with the setup piece I used for MDF, that's what the finished piece is going to look like from that angle. So I'm taking this relief cut out. The board itself, it partially is going to be edge grain, or end grain. There's edge grain, and it's also particle core, so I wanted to give as much gluing surface area that I could.
So I wanted to add a little detail to the chessboard, so I decided to put in some banding. So you can see, it's on a piece of wood right now as a strip, but you can see it's just pre-made banding. They come in roughly 36, 37 inch long pieces. And I'm going to end up inlaying that into the wood trim around, to the walnut trim. And you have to put just a small groove in. You can see it here. Maybe you can see it. But basically the banding will fit. The banding fits inside like so. Like so when it's done. So it's nice and flush with this portion here. And I won't actually insert the banding until after the walnut has been applied and mitered and all that, so it'll go on afterwards. I find it's easier to do it that way. I can put it in with an X-Acto knife. So here we go. I've already got the dado stack set up. You can see I've got the trim piece. This was just a sample to make sure I got the setup correctly. And let's run some dados.
So if you've seen one miter cut, you've seen 100. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time showing the 45-degree miters. I'm just using a standard miter saw, nothing fancy, and putting the edges on. Just making sure I'm using enough glue. I'm clamping in some cases, taping in others. But so I just glue all the frame all the way around, making sure everything lines up, of course. And then I can start working on the banding. The banding itself is going to be cut with a utility knife or an X-Acto knife. I think that's the brand, X-Acto, but or Olfa. But you can see the banding itself just fits into that groove, and I just cut it with that utility knife. Any knife, sharp knife is fine. I could have done this on the miter saw, and I could have just glued it in ahead of time. I thought this was easier. If I had bought more banding, I would have done it the other way. I would have cut it on the miter saw. So for the glue up of the banding, I just made some small strips that were roughly the same width as the banding, and I just clamped them down. I think it's a little bit overkill, but it did the job. Now this is kind of where the project took a bit of a turn. I decided I wanted storage for the pieces below, so that's what you're going to start to see here. And with that decision made that I wanted storage, I decided I didn't want to make a drawer, which is most common. I wanted something a little bit unique, so I came up with a latching system, not totally dissimilar from the way your standard door would work. So I ran a dado through the center of one of those 1/2-inch particle core walnut veneered boards, and then I put a groove within that dado to allow a 3/8 dowel inside, and it acts as a stop but also the pull. So you can see where the pieces fit inside, and then here you can see I've got the 3/8 holes drilled in those walnut pieces. And here you can actually see when I've applied them. And then I put an 1/8 of an inch hole in the ends. And those pieces fit together, and they slide together. And then I put the spring over top of that 1/8 dowel. And the two pieces, the two walnut latch pieces, actually spring or pull and push away from each other. And that's sort of the I guess the key to the entire project, or the entire latching system at least, is that the two pieces spring apart from each other. You can see them working here.
So in order to make the mechanism, the locking mechanism, work properly, I needed some form of spring back. I needed the locks to retract with your hands, but then go back in place when they're needed. So I thought about using an elastic band. I even thought about using a thin piece of veneer, but my concern there is that it would break, and certainly over time, as it dried out, it would possibly break. So I couldn't think of where to get a spring. And then I thought, well, there's a spring inside these pens. Now, unfortunately, these are my wife's pens, so I had to steal 4 of her pens. I'll do my best to fix those. They may not retract anymore, but they'll work. So thanks for that, hon. And that's where I got these little springs. They work perfectly.
So I built a frame around that base. You've seen enough of that. I didn't show you those details, but if you've seen that previously, it's exactly the same process. And I put an opening on one end. You can see this so that the latch can exit, and it will allow the piece to hook into the top of the board, or the top portion of the board. And I'm just putting rails in here to make sure that the guide, or that the latch portion, stays straight. And to keep it all lubricated, I'm using beeswax. This is normally used for cutting boards or similar, anything food related, but it's for a project like this, it actually works fairly well. And you can see the piece slides in. There's enough lubrication there. You don't want to go nuts on it because it will stick. And then I put a top cover over it, and you can see with the springs, it works very well. The top side of the chessboard is going to get a groove put into it, and that's something for the latch to fit into when it's open or when it's in the locking position. And I'm just doing the first test here, making sure that they fit inside that groove. And you know it's tight because I can lift it up and there's no movement.
So I mentioned 4 springs a little bit earlier. Here I'm going to show you exactly how I'm using them. So the first, of course, you've seen some of the build on this. It's just, you can see the 2 springs inside here, and they're just the release mechanism. See, so and it just springs back, so it's easy peasy. The second one actually took me a little while longer to work out exactly how I wanted to do it. You can see the release mechanism here. So there's a spring right here, if you can see the spring. And what I created was just a small, like a switch. So you take this apart, and it's just a piece of walnut. It's actually just one of the scrap pieces of squares for the board. I just ran an 1/8 inch dowel through it. Has a few pieces of, again, extra walnut. Just drilled some holes so it fit nice and snug. And this is acting like a switch. So you take it, and it folds back and forth. And this piece here is what fits on the inside, and that is what pushes against this part right here. So when you push the button in, it will release this and let the tray come down.
So now that we know the latching system works, it's time for me to apply the finish. So I'm using a Rubio. It's a monocoat material, and it's kind of like a linseed oil and wax kind of together. It gives you a relatively sturdy finish, but it's super easy to apply, and it gives me the matte color that I need for this chessboard. You generally don't want a gloss or even a medium type finish, anything like a 50-degree sheen. You want something 10-degree or less. So this is going to be giving me the lowest sheen possible, but still give me some durability. So I decided to use that Rubio coat. You can see some of the banding, how it turned out. I mean, I'll say it's not perfect, but it turned out pretty well. And the board itself is done.
Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. This was a fun project for myself, something that's going to bring a lot of joy to myself and my kids for years to come. So please like and subscribe that video. If you have any questions, please post them below and I'll answer as best I can. I will see you all next time. Thank you.